Good evening, I'm Lisa Zaffer, and welcome to Healing Quest, where we aim to bring you on a better path to health. Tonight, our featured guest speaker is Margaret Buskowski, and she's going to be discussing developing your psychic intuition. Welcome, Margaret.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you.
Could we just start basically and talk about what intuition is and what psychic intuition is in particular?
Sure. What is intuition? My definition of intuition is one's inner guidance, knowing. When you just know something, when you know you shouldn't, when you just have a gut feeling about something, is how I would sort of explain intuition.
So it's not anything with that you can really put your hands on. I mean, that's the basis of intuition.
That's how I basically, that's how I would talk about intuition. You know, if I had to define it based off my experience, I would say your intuition is kind of your gut feeling about things. You know, your gut instinct is kind of your intuition. You know, or you had a feeling that it's such an abstract thing, in the sense that it's hard to kind of wrap your fingers around. But it's important. So give me a second. I'm gonna try. So. I think people understand what I say when I mean it's a gut feeling. It's an instinct. It's a found opportunity. You don't know how. You can't quite explain yourself. That's how I would quantify.
If you
intuition.
had to put it.
Yeah.
Now, it seems like certain people have strong intuition and certain people are not in touch with their intuition. Are there ways that you feel you could tap into your intuition better or strengthen it if you're one of those people who doesn't feel as strong?
Sure. I think the people that I find that are more intuitive are the people who are self-aware and self-conscious of themselves and dedicated to sort of bettering themselves as human beings are generally the people that I find have a stronger sense of intuition for whatever reason. Now, whether it's they have a strong intuition, therefore they are bettering themselves, or because they better themselves, therefore have intuition, I don't know.
Which came first? Yeah.
Right.
So who can practice psychic intuition particularly?
Psychic intuition. There are different forms of psychic capacity, okay? You can be an empath, you can... There are different, you know, sympathetic, there are many different forms, clairvoyant, clairaudient. And it's my understanding that each of those has a different vibration. Everyone is pretty much empathetic. I mean, I don't know if have you ever read like a newspaper article and you read something tragic and you started crying? You're empathetic for that person.
Absolutely.
That's having empathy. You know, you can read people's emotions, you know, and you're sympathetic about a situation. And then when you start talking, and all of those things can fall under being a psychic and being intuitive. I was trained as, and I'm still trained always, as a clairvoyant. And basically, it was explained to me, and it's been my experience, that you start moving away from the emotions and you start getting more into principle and more spiritual oriented vibrations than you would the more earthbound emotional vibrations.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Kind of. I know, I'm just trying to process what you're saying. It's new.
Feel free to stop me and I could backtrack all of those things. So, okay, let me explain that.
Why don't you give us
because
examples?
that's the, sort of the foundation of the topic. Emotions aren't always true. There isn't necessarily truth in emotions. It's your reaction to your perception.
That's very interesting.
Do you know what I'm saying? There is a truth somewhere in there, and there are different vibrations. So my analysis of my upset is based on what I believe to be the case. Therefore, a reaction has occurred. You know, I've reacted somehow, whether it's I'm emotional, I've chosen to not be emotional, depending on, are you following me? So it's like
more
based
about
on
figuring out your choice and reaction and
Well,
discovering the truth?
that's
or
the
is that what you
level.
do?
I'm trying to break this down. The level of, I know,
Okay.
I stop me if I'm going off on some weird tangent, but basically, for example, we'll back up. If somebody, an empath picks up on someone's emotions. Let's stay with an empath for right now, okay? Okay, so let's say I'm the empathetic person to you. You are very upset right now. You are crying. You're hysterical. Or vice versa. You're the empath. I'm the person who's very upset. I am crying because X, Y, and Z. Okay? X, Y, and Z are a result of my brain in the sense of my brain isn't causing my emotions, but whatever I'm feeling, you know, with the loss, or I'm having a reaction to a thought that I've had, or I'm perceiving a situation to be the case. Therefore, my emotions are reacting accordingly. You know, there are different variations. That's being empathetic, being able to sort of analyze that and talk about it. When you start developing your psychic abilities, you know, or somebody's training you, or you train, it's best to always have somebody train you, but people who are natural or have a natural raw talent for it are going to kind of seek this information out themselves. But it's best to have somebody kind of guiding you. Anyway, there are different levels. So a clairvoyant sort of surpasses the emotional state. There are certain levels that one can read on. And you optimally want a reading from somebody who's clairvoyant because they are transcending the emotional environment of your current state rather than just telling you what it is.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does, actually.
Okay.
I like the way you explained it. Now, who can practice? You talk about raw talent. Is it just people who feel, who know? I mean, is that how they get involved, or is there a way of developing it, say, that you don't start out with as much raw talent?
I don't know if somebody starts off with, I don't really know the answer to your question in terms of how much raw talent does somebody have, or if it changes. I believe that people who are naturally drawn to sort of psychic information or capacity have a talent for it. Developing it is a totally different issue than having a talent for it. For example, when I was training, and again, it's an ongoing thing, similar to being a Reiki practitioner. It's just an ongoing thing. You never sort of arrive at this point. Oh my gosh, I almost just lost my train of thought. So somebody can have a raw talent, and then they develop for it. For example, I was much more of a visionary, okay? So therefore I was clairvoyant, and some people are clairaudient, they can hear better, hear messages. That's something that was not something that I was excelled at. That was something that I had to constantly train in and have somebody train me on. It just wasn't something that came naturally to me. I'm a visionary. That's my raw talent, but you kind of learn the laws, if you will, of how to get your hands on it and channel it appropriately. So you're taking all this information that somebody who has raw talent is. When you start developing your skills, you hone in on it and you can channel it more effectively without wasting, the energy that it took, the kinetic energy, if you will, it took to formulate that one thought.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that there are many different forms of intuition. How do you know which form you have? How
would you know? By knowing what they are. For example, if you're empathetic or sympathetic, do you have ESP? Can you read people's minds type thing? Like, if people start talking and you knew that was going to come out of their mouth, you probably have more of an aptitude for ESP. If you're totally sensitive to other people's emotions, you're probably empathetic. These are certain things. If you totally have strong visions, you're psychic. It's the whole vision, the third eye. Those are things that you'll know that you have an aptitude for in that area. You'll have to be careful if you start hearing voices. The white coats might come and get you. So I'm just kidding. Well, actually, I'm not. So I won't touch that subject.
You're really funny. Now, is there anything that kind of brings me to another thought I was thinking about? when you are with someone, is there anything that you sometimes don't translate or you don't feel you want to share? Or could you explain a little bit about how?
Sure.
Sure.
When I was training and when I train, it's almost like learning a different language in the sense that it was explained to me, and it has been my understanding that when you start reading as a clairaudient, there's no judgment is sort of missing from the picture. You don't judge. Should I or shouldn't I? You know, people will sometimes want to ask, like, should I take this job here? What should I do? There's no response. You know, there's no judgment. Am I bad? Am I good? Like, there's no real response. And what I've translated that to mean is the universe doesn't care. It cares about our intent. You know, it's sort of what you put out there comes back to you type thing. So it'll register intent, but should and shouldn't I? It's in, am I, you know, negative situations aren't really registered.
Now, do you think people tend to listen when there's a conflict between their head and their intuition? How do people often reconcile it? Do you think that, do you see a lot of situations where, I know it's kind of a confusing question,
No.
Are there a lot of situations where people go totally against their intuition, and what tends to happen to them as a person because of that? I mean, I know you said there's not really a judgment, but...
What would happen to somebody who was totally, was in their mind, completely analytical and non-intuitive?
Exactly, right.
Yeah, I don't really know.
Yeah.
Because I believe that whatever your art form is, I would say, well, that person, you know, is analytical for a reason, and I would honor that person's right to be analytical. So I wouldn't necessarily, you know, what are they missing? That's their talent. They're analytical.
Okay. And now,
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I guess sometimes...
Now, if people are getting conflicting information, my gut says do this, but my head's telling me not to.
Your gut, is that your intuition? Always?
Yeah, you know, like when I'm using the word gut, like my intuition, my instinct is telling me to do this, but my mind is telling me don't do it. Depending on the situation, and if it's a safe, within the parameters, normal situation that we're using the example of, I would say I would gear people towards using their intuition because it's my way of demonstrating faith. So that, and that, you know, that's what I'm more geared towards. So if somebody said my head is telling me don't do X, Y, and Z, but my gut is telling me, my instinct is telling me, I know that that's wrong. I know that that's wrong in terms of what their mind's telling them, or I know that it's right, whatever, whatever the circumstance may be. I believe that that's sort of our fate calling us.
It's very interesting. So is it possible for anyone to train, or do you think it's more beneficial for somebody to have a session with someone who is an intuitive to help?
No, I think that people who have an aptitude for it should train. You know, it's just, it's kind of like the difference between someone who's, you know, whatever the talent may be. Some people are artists, some people are, you know, writers, poets. Some people are just more intuitive. And if you're intuitive, I think that people should learn about that. That's a part of themselves, you know, it's not there in vain. So I would urge somebody to investigate something like that.
And what is involved in training? Is there only one way to train?
No, there are many, many different ways. And I would stress to people that, you know, people who want to train under me like my style. They're comfortable with me. They know who I am. I'm not out trying to, you know, ever trying to solicit people to train under me. It's usually people that I've worked with under the pretense of as a Reiki practitioner with them. They're sometimes my clients, and they're comfortable with me, and they know me, and they understand my philosophy. But I would always urge somebody to seek it. You know, either like, you know, go to Borders or, you know, any of these bookstores. There's tons around Chicago, and take books that you're drawn to, you know, and start reading them. But there are tons of places that you can go. I would recommend word of mouth A lot of times, if people have had experience with somebody, if they think that they've done a good job, or they've given them, a good read, I would tend to, take those people more than just massively advertised people.
So could you tell us a little about your particular qualifications and what your training entailed?
Sure. I was trained as a Reiki practitioner, and part of
Can you
sure
explain Reiki a little bit?
Reiki was
further?
I'm an energy worker, and part of that development, part of that section of my training dealt with my intuition. It was just sort of a natural progression in developing my intuition and psychic capacity. It's just something that unfolded for me.
Definitely.
So I trained under a woman, and then I also trained in the ministry,
Okay.
in Indiana, and I'm
I
still
can
training.
imagine that's a good complement to
Yeah,
that
so
field of
they
work.
trained me as a clairaudient. Excuse me, clairvoyant. And I'm still training as a clairaudient. I haven't received my papers, but it's an ongoing, training process where I'm studying down there.
Now, do you have core focus of what you train people in?
I try and gear people more towards clairaudient reading.
Oh, why is that?
I keep saying clairaudient, and I
You mean clairvoyant.
I do mean clairvoyant.
Okay.
Why do I do that? Because I believe that that's the most optimal read for a person. That's the thing that's going to best serve who I'm reading, in my opinion, based on what I know. Because, sometimes it is helpful to explain, enlighten somebody. My foot hurts, sorry. To explain to somebody I know. Oh my gosh, I'm losing my train of thought all of a sudden. Sorry, I was talking about my foot, and it hurts.
The core focus.
Okay,
yeah,
the core focus. Yeah, focus. I believe it's the best service for the person that's receiving the reading, because they pretty much know what their emotional state is. They want more of a message. They want clarity, clear vision.
That's what
Yeah.
clairvoyant is. Now, can you explain a typical
Sorry.
reading? No, get comfortable.
Yeah.
Take those off. What is a typical reading, and what should
typical
someone expect when they come to you? Do most people you see have something on their mind, or is it
Yes.
usually deal with current problems or past problems or loss of people? When I tend to think of intuition and psychic development, I think of people beyond, or that you've lost, and resolving issues with that. But I don't know.
Well, that's an impressive view, because most people don't have that view. But I think that you're right on. When somebody comes to me, this is how I do a reading. I ask for their name, their full name. I ask them to say it, their birth date. I read for the person, okay? I ask them to not interrupt me for about a half an hour or however long it takes. And then I open it up for questions. And I let the person know, try to stay away from should or shouldn't I, because it's just not an effective question. I read, and a lot of times people who've passed away will come into the paper. I write the name down, and then I get confirmation on my reading through a name associated with the event. And you should always make sure that the person that's giving your reading is confirming your messages. And that's what a clairvoyant will do, is they're able to confirm the message that is being, channeled, so they can give you that confirmation, which I think is really important.
Now, is there anything a person could do to prepare themselves, or is it more of the state you're in that can make it a better session?
Well, obviously, if the person has a high vibration, a lot of energy, that's going to help a reading. You always want to sort of raise the vibration of the room, meaning the energy level, and it's easier to connect. Somebody's totally closed off, you'll know that the person's closed off, but you can, that's part of being clairvoyant, or, you can surpass somebody being shut down. So,
What are some
or your messages, it's not totally dependent on the person.
So what are ways people would benefit from this kind of reading?
Maybe clarity, maybe somebody wants to connect with somebody who's passed away. People, a lot of times I find out people just need that extra boost of confidence of their own intuition. That's why I think it's so important that people develop their own intuition. It's a tool. It's never, that's one thing that I want to, things are always in motion. You're reading, anyone's reading that I give, it's not set in stone. It's not carved in stone. You know, again, energy follows thought. We change all the time. People are always growing and developing in different ways. I always caution people to not take this as some sort of a gospel. You know, it's a tool. It's a way of getting clarity, you know, and maybe it's somebody just needs to connect spiritually, you know, but it's a tool. It's not it. It's not, again, the magic wand, you know.
Is there any way for, like you mentioned, you encourage people to develop their own intuition? Is there any way we could do that without being formally trained, or?
I think so.
Just a couple.
Well, sure. It depends, you know, what it is that the person wants to do. If they just kind of want to be more intuitive, let's say. What would I tell somebody to do? You know, it's water's a really good conduit. You know, to kind of clear your mind and sort of receive internal guidance. Intuitive information is really being at one with yourself, like your higher self, being able to hear your own guidance. So meditating to hear your own guidance, to hear that inner voice that's guiding you is your intuition.
Okay. So each person could kind of find that in how they'll clear it.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be, you know, candles, incense, you know, the whole nine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it can be, it can be a couple of different things.
Okay.
I don't know what that means.
No, that's very interesting, because sometimes when you're not a natural born intuitive, you don't
so
know
it doesn't
exactly
have
where
to be.
get
Some of the best
informed.
forms of meditation that I've ever done have just been rollerblading by the lake.
Really?
Yeah.
So you just find what works for you. And
Yeah,
kind of
you
go with
totally
it.
find what works for you.
Now, personally, as a psychic, what kind of boundaries, what are the personal boundaries that you have when you're with someone?
Boundaries.
I imagine it's pretty important to create.
Yes, they're very, very important to create. You have to. You have to put up proper protection. That's why being trained is so important. Okay. So you can't just. It's important to receive proper training and to be able to channel the reading most effectively. So you can't. I don't want to start getting into this topic because it's a whole other topic, but training is required to understand the parameters in which you're working with. In boundary.
5, 4, 3, watch monitor.
Boundaries. Yeah, when somebody starts developing their psychic ability, boundaries are a huge thing. For example, for several reasons. A, because you're intuitive, you're picking up on so much information of other people that you need to learn how to block yourself so you're not a sponge. I mean, you can literally get a headache.
From other people's energy.
From other people's energy, from just anything that you're picking up, God only knows. Especially when you start opening up, you know, you become very, very sensitive to other people. So you have to learn to protect yourself and have boundaries and direct and command the information.
Are there any ways that just your average person could protect themselves when they feel someone else's energy? I know you work a lot more in depth, but just a day-to-day.
It's okay. So if somebody, I would put like a little bit of bubble. Send positive thoughts out and just sort of put a bubble
Just
around
try to
yourself.
combat it. Okay.
And your purpose should always be higher than your emotional state. So.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, that would be that's like my little advice for, you know, that's
I like
my
that,
tidbit.
yeah. It's kind of rising above.
Rising
your
above,
emotion.
but not just to rise above because you want to rise above. Rise above for something. I mean, if you just want
keeps
to
you
rise
clear.
above, that's, you know, that's great, that's honorable, you know, but what are you rising above to? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's like
You
yeah,
rise above the emotional
but
level.
have, you know, have that. You're rising above because
I like that because. Just
You
to
know,
add that in.
because you're going somewhere, you have a higher connection. Like, it's just, you know, it doesn't need to say that this person's lower than you or less than you, but, you know, if there's one thing that I'm always trying to do is not react to people's emotional states. You know, it's extremely
That must be
difficult.
hard. Yeah.
By no means am I necessarily great at it, but it's just something that I'm always striving for, you know, because I care about the fact that I am consistent within my own rules for myself. So, you know, that's what I mean by rising above for something other than the sake of just rising above.
Now, how can this benefit people? Just in summary, what would be the main?
How would developing your intuition? I think it would builds courage. It takes courage to rely on your intuition. It takes courage to follow your own instincts when it seems that no one else is following what your instincts are. You're going to have to walk alone for a while, I think. So it takes courage. I think it makes life very exciting. There are so many different reasons, but I think it can help give clarity in very trying times. I think that there's a sense of calmness and peace, a connection with ourselves, you know, in spite of circumstances and environment.
Now, how do people generally feel when they leave? Is it a range of emotion, or?
Sometimes it's a range of emotion. You know, again, when let's say grandmother just passed away 2 months ago, and the grandmother comes in the reading. It's emotional. You know, it's not Hearts and Flowers, Yellow Brick Road, like lovey-dovey, like Ken and Barbie are getting married type read. You know, everyone wants to know about this is like reality. You know, so you're reading. It's a very intimate, personal thing. You know, so I mean, loved ones could come through. You know, it's great. You know, it can be inspiring. It can be amazing. It just depends, you know, where you are. It can be unbelievable if, you know, this is something that you don't believe in, and you witness something like it. So it's mind-opening. It's definitely mind-opening, you know, but it's not something, you know, again, I use the whole example of Ken and Barbie as something very shallow and superficial. You know, this isn't, and I don't know, maybe these psychic hotlines are fine. I'm certainly not bashing them, but, you know, I mean, it's not commercialized, you know. This isn't like lose weight in 10 days type thing.
It's more of a
Off some pill
personal
type, you know what I'm saying? It can be emotional. It can be emotional, so.
So what I get out of it is that it's helping people find the truth, and
I think it helps
it
give
kind
somebody clarity. I think it puts them back in touch with their own intuition. I think that people could sense something, you know, they need to know some information, something, they were led to go here, you know. It could be for many different reasons. I don't think that there's just one reason why it can help. I think it depends on the motive. Definitely.
Okay, well, if you would like more information on Margaret Biskowski and developing psychic intuition, please call 312-664-2288. Thanks, Margaret, for being here and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thanks, Lisa.
tonight.
Thanks for your time.
Okay.
All right. Good night.